Good morning, all. Again, for those of you, who were not with us this morning. Welcome to this important session that aims to look at where the UN Sustainable Energy for All initiative stands 1 year after it was launched. Before launching into the session, allow me to point out that the World Energy Council is not an impartial observer of this important initiative aimed at finding concrete solutions to the problem of 1.2 billion people currently living without access to modern forms of energy. I should point out that the WEC's membership is grounded in over 90 national member committees, 93 actually, and most, if not all, of these 1.2 billion are in WEC member countries. So we cannot remain on the sidelines of this discussion. Indeed, WEC has been a keen supporter and active participant in the United Nations Sustainable Energy for All initiative ever since it was launched by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And as incoming chair, I can assure you that WEC will remain firmly committed to supporting this initiative over the coming months and years. By now, most of you will have heard of the 2013 WEC Trilemma report, Time to Get Real, the Case for Sustainable Energy Investment. The energy trilemma refers to the three key pillars of global energy: security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability. We all recognize that more needs and more must be done to improve the lives of 1.2 billion without access to energy. But coming up with tangible and implementable solutions to a massive problem is something we have to address. And my panel today is well placed to answer the questions. This morning's 4 panelists represent stakeholders who drive the agenda for access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy for all. Kande Yumkela, we're deeply honored that you've taken the time to join us at this Congress. Kande Yumkela is the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General and Chief Executive for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. He holds the rank of Under-Secretary General in the United Nations, and as Special Representative, Mr. Yumkela will seek to mobilize action toward a sustainable energy future and accelerate the implementation of the Secretary General's initiative, as well as engaging with the leadership of relevant stakeholders in government, businesses, academia, civil society at the highest level to advocate and promote sustainable energy for all. My next panelist is Bruno Lescure. Bruno joined the EDF group in 1978, and he has played a key role in developing EDF's business worldwide. He is now in charge of EDF's activities in Southern Europe, and he is the CEO of Edison in Italy. Dr. Birol is the IEA's chief economist and responsible for IEA's flagship World Energy Outlook publication, which is recognized as the most authoritative source of strategic analysis of global energy markets. Among other roles, he has served on UN Secretary General's high-level group on sustainable energy for all. Vijay Iyer is director of the World Bank's Sustainable Energy Department, where he guides the bank's policies, programs, and strategies in the energy sector. Among others, he plays a leadership role in defining and managing the bank's group. Its contributions to the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, and his advisory board is co-chaired by World Bank Group President Kim. I will ask each of the panelists a first question. They will have some 5 minutes to give their views, and we'll come back for a second round of, I hope, questions that will bring us in an interactive dialogue. First, Candy, was the 2012 UN Year of Sustainable Energy for All achieved, and what is the way forward?
Thank you very much. We pushed for a year of energy, which was 2012, to use 2012 politically to create greater awareness about why we believe energy was central to the challenges I mentioned in the other panel. And we achieved quite a bit, because we went for just a year and focused a lot of campaigns around countries, but also in New York, to get the diplomats to agree that, okay, energy is important. And what we got at the end of 2012 was now a decade for sustainable energy, starting from January 2014, meaning what? 10 years of concerted attention to some of what you have in the trilemma. And so for us, that is a big achievement, because we struggled before to convince the diplomats that they should look at energy for development, not just social sectors and so on. So politically, we believe we achieved a lot. Second, we got a lot of commitments from companies by the time we got to Rio last year. We got over $50 billion of commitments from private sector, banks, and various companies on the 3 targets that we established within the initiative, which was big. Also in Rio, the energy sector got more commitments than anything else. We estimate that in Rio Plus 20 Summit, which was the Summit on Sustainable Development, of the $500 billion commitments that were announced, at least half of them were related to energy somehow. So that awareness creation in 2012 was important. Finally, we've also established now a governance structure for the initiative, chaired by the Secretary General and the President of the World Bank. All the regional banks, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, they've all set up units within their banks to drive the targets of sustainable energy for all. This year, I'm sure Vijay Iyer will talk about that, the whole World Bank strategy or framework is based for energy, is based on the 3 targets of sustainable energy for all. Next week, Wednesday, the Secretary General is coming to Denmark. We'll launch the Energy Efficiency Hub. As I explained earlier, the initiative is just not about access. It is also convincing the high emitters to also push energy savings, some of what you've been talking here, energy efficiency and so on. But a lot of challenges remain. To be honest, to Bonka as well, I give him credit. When we finished in Rio, he came up to me and said, Kande, I like everything you're doing, but I don't think you are committed to civil society. So Bonka, yes, we've set up the Civil Society Practitioner Network. We have 1,500 registered NGOs and social entrepreneurs, which we want to build up to over 2,000. Real practitioners on the ground like yourselves and others who are bringing energy solutions bottom of the pyramid. But they also did what they called a civil society roadmap to keep us honest, that we were not just talking to big boys, we were committed to the grassroots as well. And finally, your group, I give credit to Jim Rogers, Duke Energy, and also Brian Dames. They were all working with us. They've also developed this initiative on the global electrification. We're very grateful that your group is also now beginning to say, how will utilities be part of bringing energy solutions to people faster? I don't know if I still have time. That's my clock. Oh, that's my clock. Okay, the challenges. In other words, we've spent time now setting up the structures. How do we lead this forward? And I'm happy to see Fatih's group as well are keeping us honest that if we're advocating, it has to be based on solid analysis. If we're going to advise governments, it has to be based on good analysis. So we're very grateful that the IEA is fully behind us, putting their whole analytical power behind us. Finally, the challenges. According to the World Bank, they've now done some analysis together with also International Energy Agency. We've just launched what we call the Global Tracking Report. Can we check every few years whether in fact we're on track to achieve the targets? So that is out. But they've already estimated that we need $600 to $800 billion above business as usual to be able to achieve those targets by 2030. So it's a lot of work. So what we will do in New York next month, Secretary General, we hope, will set up a subcommittee now of these presidents of the multilateral development banks, and we're hoping we bring in the private equity fund managers as well. How do we mobilize that kind of investment? What are the business models? What is working now? And so there's a lot of work to do to bring the investments, technology, and deploy them in countries. I call it, our challenge now is converting commitments to kilowatt hours for real people. How to do that is going to be a challenge in the next few years.
Thank you, Candy. This is a very nice bridge into what I will ask Bruno. Bruno, as a business leader, experience in overseeing energy undertakings and major energy undertakings worldwide, what's your view, and do you have any examples of success we can build on?
Thank you. I'm speaking here this morning on behalf of Henri Proglio, the Chairman and Chief Executive of the EDF Group, who regrets to have been unexpectedly kept in Europe and asked me to express our gratitude to our Korean hosts, the WEC Organizing Committee, the WEC, and all colleagues for a great program for the 22nd World Energy Congress here in Daegu. I will share with you our views and experiences on the key question of sustainable energy for all. For the emerging countries, first, access to energy is not a philanthropic question. The stake for those countries is not to distribute eco-lamp bulbs in remote areas, and we have had a lot of experience of these kind of actions, but it has an industrial dimension at the country level, and the real issue is to establish a suitable energy plan, including electricity, which serve and benefit the national development goal of those countries. In our view, three layers coexist, three dimensions coexist in emerging countries, which have to be taken into account. There is a question of the extreme poverty, and we all know that energy, access to a minimum of energy, is a major element for improving health, education, and food supply. But there is also the question of large area, not yet developed. And for solving that kind of problem, there is a need of financing, international cooperation, and also progresses on governance. Another dimension is, or kind of problematic, is related to the industries, urban centers, and social groups, which have already started to develop, and they need to continue their development. And then, for that, of course, they need to have access to innovation, the most advanced technologies, and also they need to improve their regulation, all the regulation which makes the development possible. Those three dimensions are now taken into account globally as energy, which was not part of the Millennium Goals, will be taken into account in the objectives which will be implemented starting from 2015 to replace Millennium Goals. Energy is therefore recognized as a major stake to achieve sustainable development. But this question of sustainable energy for all is not only a question for emerging countries. It is also a very important question for developed countries. And if I may, the French energy debate on energy transition is a good illustration of that kind of importance of developing a sustainable energy system. In the case of France, but in a broader view, in the case of Europe, the question is how to decarbonize the electricity system. And to this regard, I would, of course, mention that, first of all, nuclear, in our case, has an important role to play because it's obviously in our economies a very competitive, safe, and CO2-free way of generating electricity with assets which have a very long time life, 40 or up to 60 years basis. But we have also to improve and to continue to develop the renewable energy in our system. To that regard, let me have a comment. Europe has spent 80 billion euros of investment since in 2011 for developing renewable, twice as much as the United States. Of course, we have to recognize that adding capacity powered by renewable sources cannot be an end in itself. We have to take into account the best possible integration of these intermittent sources of energy in a very sophisticated electricity system. Then we have also to take care about the way the demand is playing a role in adjusting the anti-equilibrium in the system. And this is all the question of better integration of the demand side response in a sophisticated electricity system. But energy, sustainable energy for all, is not only a question of having the best available technologies for having the best possible mix of generation technologies. It's also, and I would say more importantly, a question of competencies and capacity buildings, because in order to build this sustainable energy for all system we all will want to have, probably the key resources is the human brain.
Thank you. We'll move on to Fatih, but I will come back to you with concrete examples of what you have seen with the worldwide experience you have been building upon. Fatih, over 10 years ago, IEA did the first ever assessment of energy and poverty. Your report evidenced the size and the nature of the challenge of universal energy access. What's your evaluation of where we stand now?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to everybody. As you said, 10 years ago, for the first time, we look at it, how many people really have no access to electricity? And it's just a coincidence that I am next to Bruno now. It was another WEC meeting, if I am not wrong, in Buenos Aires. And there was an EDF reception. And in that reception, one of the EDF CEOs gave a very impressive speech. It was even before Monsieur Gadonex. And he said that there are so many people without having access to electricity. So on one hand, it was good that he underlined this, but so many people. How many? We don't know. You don't say, I have so much money, or I have so much debt. If you take something seriously, you put a number to that. So we started 10 years ago putting a number, how many million people have no access to electricity, and since 10 years in the World Energy Outlook, pushing with this through, and now I am very happy that many international organizations, WEC, World Bank, United Nations, and the companies are on board. This is very good news. However, I want to, if you allow me, Madam Chair, I want to highlight 3 issues that I think important in this process to be careful. First, this 1.3 billion people, what kind of electricity generation, what kind of electricity source they are going to have in order to put the electricity in their homes, in their residences, and so on. There is a bit of a misunderstanding that this should be all renewable energies. There are many applications that the renewable energies, especially many off-grid applications, it makes sense. But I find it rather patronizing to tell them or to give the impression that they should be all using renewable energies. I think our criteria should be, when we say sustainable energy for all, they should use whatever makes economic sense to those people. If it is renewable energies, and in most cases it may be the case, perfect. But if it is nuclear power or natural gas or other energy sources, we should be very, very understanding of that, because even the CO2 emissions coming from this 1.3 billion people, if they all would have access to electricity, it is so small compared to the emissions coming from the other countries. So the first thing is, yes, for renewable energies, but it is not the entire story. We should look at all options. Second, many utilities in these countries, emerging countries, developing countries in Africa and India and Southeast Asia, they have difficulties to invest because most of them are loss makers, and most of them are loss makers because of the heavily subsidized electricity prices. And we have analyzed this, and we have found out that of these subsidies, which are put in order to, with the motto, to protect the poor, of these subsidies, only 8% of this money, subsidies, go to the 20% lowest income group, and more than 90% of the subsidies go to medium and higher income groups. So subsidy schemes do not help the poor, it helps the medium and higher income levels, and with the lack of revenues the utilities facing, they will be unable to make investments so that the poor is punished through the subsidies. This is the second point I wanted to make after renewables. Third and the last one, Madam Chair, dear colleagues, is about the governance issue. When we look at the future of the energy access, we expect that in India and Southeast Asia, we expect a bit of an improvement with the current economic context, but the problem will be more in Africa. And we know that in Africa, there are many countries now are discovering oil and gas resources, which is a very good news for them and for the rest of the world. However, how these revenues are used will be very important. And I want to give you one number, and I want to stop here. My third point, there is one country in the region, more than 150 million people population, and 50% of the population, they have no access to electricity, 50%. In the middle of oil and gas richness, this country has 50% no access to electricity. And we have calculated that if this country would spend some part of its oil and gas revenues to building power plants, they will solve the problem. And what is this part? It is not only 6% of their revenues, if they would have spent, they would solve the problem. It is not 1% of the revenues, if they would have spent, they would solve the problem. If they would spend only and only 0.6% of their oil and gas revenues on electricity sector, they would have solved the problem. So therefore, it is not only the availability of money, but it is also the governance issue in the very region. These are the 3 points I wanted to make, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And again, I guess I'm very lucky because you're paving the way for the next question to our next panelist. Vijay, with your experience at the World Bank, listening to Fatih, what is it that governments can do to make their countries more attractive to investors?
Thank you and good morning. I wanted to start by greeting everyone and conveying the greetings of our President Jim Kim. He is from Korea and he wanted to be here for the WEC conference. You had invited him, but due to preoccupations he could not. So on his behalf, I wanted to congratulate the WEC leadership in organizing such a wonderful conference and giving us a chance to be here. So it is really a fantastic gathering of professionals in the field, and the exchange of views has been very rich. And I think that given that the Sustainable Energy for All initiative itself is a massive partnership, a massive campaign that we are trying to pull together across the globe, we could not have thought of a much better setting to have this conversation. So thank you very much. In answer to your specific question about what we have done in the 1 year of Sustainable Energy for All and what governments can do, it's a little bit of a glass half full, half empty kind of story for the first year of this initiative. We have made progress on some very important areas, and in some areas we have not made the progress that we had wanted to make. It has been a year of learning and creating the building blocks that would take this initiative forward. And we are very grateful that a number of governments have come forward, a number of institutions have come forward to actually put together ideas, to put together actions and commitments. And I think the future looks very promising. It's a very challenging initiative. The goals are extremely ambitious, but they are achievable. Some countries have shown that they can, in the space of 15 to 20 years, actually achieve universal energy access. We have the case of Vietnam. We have the case of Tunisia, which have actually achieved universal access within a finite period of time. Ghana was mentioned earlier today, 70% has been electrified in Ghana. So it is possible, but it requires a massive effort. So what can governments do? I think there are three areas that take from the point that Kande made about the level of investment needed. If we are looking to bring $600 to $800 billion of additional investment in the three goals of sustainable energy for all, there are three things that have to come together and come together very quickly. One, there has to be concerted political efforts by governments to establish the kind of framework, the kind of regimes that would be investment friendly, that would create or bring down the barriers that exist to energy investment. They have to understand what kind of issues face them in the energy sector and how to set up the framework to create the confidence for investments to come in. And the investment scale-up has to be quite huge, tremendous, in order for that confidence to really materialize in the investment levels that are required. Two, I think that companies in the field, in the energy field, have to think about the element of risk and the return in slightly different ways. If they wait for every country to fix its policy and regulatory regime in a way that they would be comfortable in going in and investing, it's going to take a very long time, and we don't have that kind of time. So I'm also calling upon companies to see whether they can start to think a little bit more creatively about risk, and institutions like ours, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, other institutions which are in the field of managing political risk, managing investment risk, will partner with these companies to see how in the initial stages we can start to create frameworks and instruments and interventions that will enable them to manage the risk of the first investments. Countries learn, and we start to build different kinds of models, business models that can start to create a much more conducive investment environment. And last but not least, I think that there are two areas where the initiative has to work with organizations like the WEC to address the relationships not just at the government level, but at the subnational level and at the city level. And more importantly, the weak link in all of this is the energy utilities. I think that in the developing world, we find that energy utilities are not able to establish themselves and perform well, not able to keep up with the technology and the demands that are being placed on them. Fatih, you very correctly mentioned the issue of the tariffs not being right, not being able to generate enough revenue. This is where I think that a lot of effort is needed. So these are three areas which I would put out as my message to governments.
Thank you very much. Bruno, I'm curious to hear you on concrete examples you can give us of what you've seen on the ground as a success, and what are the conditions behind these successful projects?
Yeah, the best practical example we have to offer, is a realization of a very large dam, 1,070 megawatt on the Nam Tum River in Laos, which is now operating for a few years. The rationale of this project was to try to take advantage of the hydraulic resources of Laos, to take advantage of the quite large need in power, in new power of Thailand, and to try to put that together with the help of large global institution, and of course, the World Bank has played a key role in financing this project. Then the idea was to build the dam, to sell on a long-term contract basis part of the electricity to Thailand, the rest of the electricity being one of the source of electricity for Laos, which was at this time, very much in need of the first economic sources for generating electricity. And it has also been an opportunity to develop at the very local level the first access to electricity to thousands of people in the region. And this is the best example I can propose to you to illustrate that it is really necessary to have a comprehensive approach which take care of the very local situation of the people. On top of that, the people had some views on the impact of this large dam on their life, everyday life. On the national level, of course, Laos has a country at the country level to have a long-term view on what had to be its energy policy for the future, to take advantage of the regional possibility of cooperation with a more advanced country like Thailand, and to put that together with all the resources a large company, international company like EDF and its contractor had, together with the World Bank and financial global institution. And this is it has taken a fairly long time to put that together, but at the end of the day, it works. And this dam is working well and provide electricity in the region, and we hope it will be a good example to be replicated not only in this part of the world, but maybe in other parts like Africa.
Thank you very much. So a concrete example of how government, industry, the expertise that the industry brings to a project, and the local community can put their effort together, and the World Bank. But you said it took 10 years. Is that what you referred to? A very long time. I'll be back to you in just a minute. So let's keep in mind that if we want to change the course of action, we have really to put our act together now. Vijay, you want to add something?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well.
I thought you wanted to comment on something Bruno had said. No, I referred to the World Bank as being part of the project.
So what I wanted to just say was that was a fantastic example of how, in a very challenging setting, we could come together, public-private sector, with the government to create something that Laos has now taken forward in terms of establishing other hydropower projects. And this is exactly the point that I was trying to illustrate, that in the first instance, it required a very high level of intervention to get the right transaction framework in place for that investment to happen. But now Laos is going ahead with a number of projects where that level of deep intervention or support is not required. And in fact, many of those projects are not even supported by the development banks. They are being financed through other sources. It is that kind of interventions that are needed more and more. And I think the issue of speed, we are all in a tremendous hurry. 2030 is just 15 years away. And the task is tremendous. So in addition to trying to put these blocks in place, we have to also do it very fast. And this is where the issue of acceleration and political leadership comes in. And I think a big part of the initiative really is in reaching out to political leaders across the countries, at the city level, at the country level, at the provincial level, to start realizing the opportunities and the support that is needed in order to push investments and to push the action that is required.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to you, Fatih, and you referred to Korea, to our host country. Yesterday, the president reminded us that in 50 years, this country has emerged from poverty and is now a performing economy still growing. Any views on that transformation?
So Korea had a very impressive economic growth, fueled by a lot of energy demand growth, and we should all look at the Korean example very carefully, because Korea is not an energy-rich country. If I'm not wrong, more than 90% of the hydrocarbon is imported. And Korea has now a new concept it came up with, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, the previous government and current government, the green growth. So, and this is important for Korea and for the rest of the region here. And many countries in the region, especially Southeast Asia, getting inspirations from the Korean experience. However, when I look at the region, growth is definitely right. This region is one of the engines of the global economic growth. But if you look at the numbers, it will be very difficult to say that this growth is fueled by green. From the green, if we understand the renewable energies. Once again, renewable energies is very important, but we should be careful about the economics of it. When I look at the numbers, it is mainly coal which is used in the region. When you look at the power plant commissioned, ordered in the next 15 years, more than 2/3 of the power plants are coal-fired power plants. Why? Because it is cheaper. So therefore, what I see is that we see the trend that the growth is more than green. It's a black growth in the region, mainly fueled by coal. And we have to take this into consideration, as climate change is one of the most crucial challenges we have in front of us. Therefore, even in the case of natural gas, yes, natural gas is 2 times cleaner than coal when you look at the CO2 emissions. But it is at the same time producing 1 kilowatt-hour of electricity from natural gas in this region is 2 times more expensive than coal. So therefore, it will be very difficult to push the people, especially in this region. There are about 150 million people who have no access to electricity, to push them to go for more expensive options in the absence of any regional, national, or international agreement to push them to go forward. If we leave everything to the markets, the growth will be a black growth in the region, despite all the good intentions we have to move it in a more sustainable way. And I think it is a trend that we have to see, and this is unfortunately the naked truth.
Thank you. Again, a call to governments for a comprehensive and very strong approach to access, but to sustainable energy also. Let me turn to you, Candy, now. You've heard our co-panelists. What are the initiatives that we can envisage to turn your objectives into a deliverable project or projects? So my question to Candy, how can we turn initiatives such as the UN Sustainable Energy for All into deliverable objectives?
With the 3 objectives we've defined for now, universal access, energy efficiency, and renewables, we've developed the global tracking report. We've built in some indicators now that we will check regularly to see how countries are progressing. But let me give you examples of some of what we're experimenting with already. The European Union committed itself to the initiative. They put a target to connect 500 million energy poor people that have zero access to electricity within the 2 decades. They backed that up with 400 million euros that they've passed on to the European Investment Bank to experiment with leveraging additional funds from capital markets and also developing de-risking instruments. The Inter-American Development Bank did the same pledge, about $5 billion pledged for the next 4 or 5 years to the initiative, but also to leverage funds from market. African Development Bank, same, $1 billion to leverage $4 billion from markets. So the one point is that we see the development banks putting out funding to be able to leverage additional cash from global markets. We will see now, probably by next June, whether these are adding up. Can they help us reach this 600 billion to 800 billion that we need to move forward? Also, as I mentioned, the World Bank and other groups are also working heavily now on the policy front. We are coming up with a report on investment readiness in the developing countries. We will be working with them on the public policy, but all sector reform within what we call energy. We'll have energy policies, energy strategies, but also developing what we call an energy prospectus, a plan for 10, 20 years and what investments will be taken. But keeping Fatih's point into consideration, we cannot say to poor countries, we will not finance a coal-fired plant for you if you need it to get access. There in Africa, our contribution to emissions is less than 3%. So you cannot use a green label to say, well, we want to help you, we'll invest, but if it's a coal-fired plant, we'll not do it in Kenya. Well, excuse me, they need energy. So we have to look at a complete mix. So the prospectus will really look at the needs of the country, what renewable resources they actually have or don't have, and what the mix should be given their current state. My Kenyan friends were telling me outside, this conference has not talked enough about geothermal. In the Rift Valley, Kenya, Tanzania, and others, there's a huge potential for geothermal. So, for example, the president of Iceland has offered his country to provide training for Africans who want to learn more about geothermal, because that has been the basis of their own industrialization. And he is part of our advisory group. This is an offer he has made concretely. Finally, we're struggling with the private sector. How do I get your constituency, utilities, to work with me? And I can show you 2 ways that I believe you can work with us. Can we get your utilities from the advanced countries to help us talk to utilities in Africa to be willing and open to the kinds of reforms we need, the governance questions that Fatih and others have raised? Utilities can be helpful, but they can be major barriers to reforms in countries in the energy sector that we need. These are complicated institutions. There are unions there. They're used to doing business in a certain way. They want to protect their jobs. And we believe they're not as amenable to reforms as possible. But maybe if the message is from another utility, showing them the advantages of reform that will bring in investments, maybe they will listen. The second part where I think you can be very helpful to us as well is in the capacity building. The energy sector is complicated. When I talk to donors, sometimes some think they want to look at the energy sector like distributing vaccines and other, aid programs. And I say it's more complicated. We need the engineers. You take Tanzania. Tanzania just discovered huge gas deposits. The president is committed not only to export LNG, but to bring that gas in mainland to generate power, to process his petroleum resources into LPG and others. You need a lot of engineers. So how do we work with gas companies and others, or your utilities, to say, hey guys, how do we build capacities in these countries using your experts? Sometimes even volunteerism is welcome, so that in fact we expand the market opportunities for these countries to know the policies they need to put in place, but also to do the kind of work they need to manage the power plants more efficiently, look at the wastage in the transmission lines. So these are practical areas where I think your constituency can be very helpful to us about practical ways to make commitments become kilowatt hours on the ground.
Thank you. And most probably the human capacity building will bring the major companies and utilities closer to the ground and start building that trust you were referring to earlier. Vijay, any missing pieces on your part so that you can see better tracking and incentivizing of the various initiatives that are brought forward to the bank?
So let me build on two things that have been said. One, Fatih made the point about the subsidies and the governance around the power sector, rather energy sector in general in countries. I mean, the issue of how energy should be priced is a complex, it's usually a political one. It is not an economic decision in most countries. And I think if you talk to finance ministers in countries, they would say that, the energy should not be subsidized because it does drain their budget, it creates distortions, it creates inequitable entitlements within the society. But the political compulsion of providing energy cheap is what overrides that kind of economic rationale. So one of the missing pieces really is to, going forward, to put in place elements of support for those countries that are willing to tackle this challenge. Because it's a very difficult challenge to undertake. It requires, at one level, deep analysis. It requires staging it very well to take the kind of political and social protection kind of actions that would enable you to roll back those subsidies. And I think it's important that under the initiative and otherwise we are able to support governments and countries that want to actually proceed in that direction. And there should be a little bit of leaning forward to try and see how we can bring more and more countries into understanding and trying to address that issue. The second part of it is really the alternatives. Fatih very eloquently put the issue in front of us that whatever we do today, the cost of going for alternatives is such a high capital cost. For many countries, they can't afford it. But I think there is a little bit of a responsibility on our part to try and see how those alternatives can be made less costly. So there are barriers that countries face in terms of information, in terms of technology, in terms of being able to create good projects and understand how some of the alternatives can be developed. Hydropower is a great example. Your company in Canada has done tremendous work in developing low-cost hydropower. We need more of that effort in the hydropower arena. Africa, for instance, has realized only 10% of its hydropower resources. This is a resource that, like coal, can provide continuous power supply, can provide it in a much cleaner way. Of course, doing hydropower projects has its own risks. It's difficult to do it. It has to be done in environmentally and socially responsible ways. But we have learned a lot in the last 20, 30 years in doing hydropower projects more responsibly, more appropriately, involving the local community. I think that learning has to move to more and more countries so that we can start to build some of these projects and build them faster, build them better. So that area is something that, similarly, geothermal requires a lot of investment, upfront exploration cost. So I think we need to work on bringing the barriers to these alternatives down. For instance, in the bank, we have launched an initiative with 12 countries to help them map renewable energy resources. What are the best locations for wind? What are the best locations for solar projects? How can technology transfer from one country to another create lower cost alternative solutions? So I think more work in this area is needed. And here again, The partnership is much wider than the development community. It is much wider than national governments. It includes CSOs. We need more bunker roys who can actually, work at the community level and bring that kind of an initiative to accompany much of the larger transformational projects we are talking about, because that, at the heart of it, no matter how big a project we build, it's not going to penetrate to the rural area. So I think a lot more is needed in terms of bringing these pieces together. And therefore, the power of partnership, the power of convening, working together, seeing who has the comparative advantage in a particular field and deferring to them to take the leadership, all these things are required in the sustainable energy for all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes left, and I'm looking at the assembly here. We probably have a microphone somewhere. Questions? I open the floor. Yes, we have a first question here. Could we bring the microphone, please? Could you identify yourself before putting your question to the panelists, please?
Yes, good morning. My name is Khalid Benamou. I'm the managing director of the Saharin project out of Morocco. And considering the challenge, the question that I have to the panel, we've all looked at essentially top-down solutions for addressing access to electricity needs. My question would be, considering the challenges, both environmental and social, what about entrepreneurship in the developing countries, encouraging new players to come in with new sources of renewable energies in the way that has been done, in fact, in other countries that have had successful programs?
Who wants to take that question? The World Bank, Vijay.
I can take a shot at it, and then I'll defer to my colleagues here on the panel to give a more complete answer. I think it's a great point. As I was mentioning, I think we need all these both top-down, bottom-up initiatives to go hand in hand. I just wanted to give you one example. The Lighting Africa program is a program that has unleashed the entrepreneur abilities of local companies and local innovators to come up with products and produce them more cheaply, but at good quality. So the Lighting Africa program that was launched about 4 or 5 years ago essentially only tried to open up a market, and Bankar in his presentation had shown the kerosene lamp. The Lighting Africa program has only one objective: to replace that kerosene lamp with a good quality light which can operate at half the cost and can provide products that are produced locally, are produced and distributed so that the wealth, the jobs are created in the local economy. We need many more programs like that, and to be very honest, there is no dearth of ideas and innovation in this field. There is a lot of work going on. It is up to us to see how we can support it, nurture it, and incubate and bring it forward. Off-grid electrification is another area where we see a lot of local entrepreneurs now with the low cost of photovoltaic stepping up and creating very innovative businesses around how energy services can be supplied. And we are working with a number of those in different countries. But yes, we need more of that support coming from some of the big companies as well, because they need to inject some of their capital and management capability and the ability to bring ideas to scale into this area as well. It should not be left only to the development banks and to the governments. I think the private sector should step in as well.
Thank you, Vijay. Candy, anything you want to add to this?
Very necessary to develop some more energy entrepreneurs, but also it's part of why we're trying to set up this practitioner network. We've seen some very successful social entrepreneurs in Asia that have done very well. We're trying to see how those ideas can be replicated in Africa, but we see some challenges already. Some of them can do 2-3 villages, but then you want to scale up that model. We know the poor people are paying to 10 or 15 more. You run into a number of problems. Getting financing for them to even replicate a good idea, a model that is already proven in concept. Getting funding, operating funds for them is very tough. We've also seen some cases where using some of the franchise models that I have seen also in Asia or even in Kenya, getting those into West Africa has been tough because you have to do the training. Who pays for the training? Third, in some sessions, I've heard people say money is not a problem. There's a lot of money, trillions of dollars in pension funds and so on. Nobody right now is providing funding for preparing the proposals. In the energy sector, it takes real cash to do those feasibility studies, to do the environmental impact assessments. So when people say, well, we need more entrepreneurs, I say, well, who pays or helps them to finance those pre-investment stages? It's real money. And in the audience here, you have an entrepreneur. We see some of these again coming up in Africa. He will be presenting later today his idea. Maybe he wants to stand up on gas for Nigeria. He's ready. He has cash, but he's looking for partners to invest. But he needs help now to do the engineering design. He's from a location in Nigeria that I believe the world cannot leave as it is, the Niger Delta. One of the richest gas locations in the world. Kids there go to school without electricity. That should bug our conscience. The soil is polluted, the air is polluted, they're shipping out a lot of stuff. That should not happen in the next 50 years. But the entrepreneurs like those. Finally, we've seen also in Africa, I mean, when the Americans have launched now Powering Africa initiative, some of the capital is coming from African entrepreneurs. The US wants to do $16 billion, $7 billion from government, leveraging $9 billion from markets or private sector. Some of the private sector that have stepped forward are African private sector to build power plants, Aliko Dangote, Tony Olumelu and others. So we hope that governments in Africa will create that condition where these guys can go out, bring partners, other utilities, others, to really come and invest in whether it's off-grid or on-grid solutions.
Back to responsible governments. I have a few minutes, at the very most 5, but I see 3 hands. Maybe in a sequence we'll take the 3 questions and then we'll ask our panelists. And I have another one too. Thank you. Yes, the microphone. Could you please raise your hand so that, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Ephraim. I came from Ethiopia, Ministry of Water and Energy. I am very much impressed by the morning session and this one too. I have only 2 points to raise. To bring about sustainable energy, there are 2 sides, up and bottom, the receiving side and the providing side. On the receiving end, the energy which will be supplied should be properly used. And the technology also has to be properly used and replicated. Doing this needs standard. And so, is there any concern concerning standard in grassroots level? There are lots of good technologies, but due to difference in standard, couldn't be replicated. And another point is case of data, information. There is a mention about proposals. Proposals based on simple desktop work might not result in good projects. So what is your opinion on provision of information, proper information for proper projects that are tangible to be implemented and supported? Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll take the second question immediately. Just behind you, please raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ali Al-Ghafri. I'm from Oman. I would like to thank everyone here, and from this morning and this lecture today, I find, and yesterday and the previous days, there is a big gap between the developing country and developed country. And we are expecting the technology is there from the developed country, but my question here, when we are asking the investment for the developed country, is, I think my message to the developing country is, I mean, one thing is very important from my point of view is to feel the private sector is safe to invest in the energy or electrical sector, is to be regulated. That means independent power to be an independent body to regulate this, I mean, sector, energy or electrical, so the investment or the investor feels safe for investing his money for a certain country. So my message is, I mean, for a developing country is very important to have the sector is regulated, to have independent body, not the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think I saw a hand just behind you. If not, there's a question to my right here, and that will be this morning's, right? Yes, can you please raise your hand so that the microphone gets to you?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mustafa Bediba. I am from the Senegalese utility, Senelec. My point is relative to the technology, and I want to make emphasis on the use of hydro and solar as a technology to accelerate the access to electricity. I think that hydro is very suitable in putting together countries in regional projects, and it is really cost effective. And use hydro and solar can mitigate the cost of solar energy, which is very available in countries like Africa and Asia. And to put all these technology in place, government has to accelerate reforms, reforms on environment of business. I think that this is really key to facilitate investment. Multilateral investment, bilateral investment, and also private investment. Business environment is really key in some countries. And I want to take as an example the contribution to Chinese investment in Africa. If you look at all these projects which are in progress, many of them are financed by China. And they are taking a real step in the funding of the investment in the energy sector in Africa and in other parts of the countries. And the World Bank also play key roles because they are present in all countries, and they can advise the government, coach the government, and put in place some important tools like to guarantee investment. Really, these are the 3 points I wanted to put in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 comments on governance, and we have a question on replicability standards. I see you put your mic on. You have a comment on this, and maybe Bruno afterwards.
Yeah. I just want to piggyback on the point he made. We should also push South-South cooperation. I think maybe Fatih or somebody mentioned it earlier. The Chinese and the Indians are doing some innovative stuff, taking a chance, particularly in some of the poorer countries. I think we should look at that and make the same bet. They're willing to provide assistance till the market is developed. And I think that's a good model that could help other countries as well. Standards I leave for others.
Bruno, any views on the replicability?
Yes, I have 2 comments on what has been said. You know, first of all, regarding the technologies, I think the comments made illustrate that we have to have a technology-neutral approach when we recommend the policymaker to make a decision. Of course, there could be a good combination in some part of the world between hydro and solar, but you know, to recommend solar to be developed in the north of Europe, where there is almost no sun, is not a good idea. On the standardization, I would just reflect on the evolution of the nuclear industry. In this industry, we have the institutional architecture at the worldwide level with the IAEA. There is also a good understanding within the industry of what are the best improvement or the best level of safety we can achieve. There is an extremely efficient cooperation within operators through an organization called ONO. And even in those difficult times, I'm thinking about our Japanese colleague, there is still a good capability in this industry to cooperate and to exchange views on what could be the highest standard in safety in this industry. It is very contentious, but it makes me very optimistic on the ability for the industry as a whole, together with the governments, to cooperate.
Thank you, Fatih.
Thank you. So, two answers or two reflections about the two questions very briefly. One is is it bottom-up or top-down? Of course, bottom-up efforts are very much appreciated. But we should, while we put and encourage the bottom-up approaches, we should make sure that the governments do not lose the responsibility that it is their job to provide electricity to their people. So this should be clear to everybody. Second point, yes, utilities, private sector involvement is very important. But to be honest with you, we have so many colleagues here from private sector who have a strong heart to address this issue. But with all respect to that, private sector will go there only if they are sure that they will have significant returns. It is not a matter of intention or feelings or will. If there are significant returns, and it is for the governments to make sure that those conditions are there, the private sector comes. Another point, Madam Chair, there is one country and one example we forget in terms of top-down successes, and it is China. And for me, when we look at the history of energy, it is the biggest achievement ever for me which took place. China brought electricity in 10 years of time to 500 million people, 500 million, it's entire Europe. So this is something to take note of. Of course, we know that China has specific conditions, specific context, but still bringing 500 million people electricity is something that we all have to take inspiration of. Finally, about the data question that my colleague over there asked, this is definitely a big issue in terms of electricity access. When we talk about sustainable development today, we mainly talk about electricity access, but there is another hallmark of energy poverty, which is that the 2.5 billion people use primitive source of biomass, wood stoves, dung, agricultural waste, for cooking purposes. This is another problem, and there's a data problem there too, and it is mainly in Africa. Perhaps I can give one information here. World Energy Outlook, our main publication next year, will focus on Africa. Everything about Africa, access, oil and gas resources, and governance, and we will come up with much better data working with several African countries and African organizations.
I think you're paving the way for our next Congress in Istanbul, Fatih. This session is about to come to a close. Before I do, I would like to thank our panelists, Candy, Bruno, Fatih, and Vijay. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for your very transparent approach to the questions I've put to you. What is the takeaway from this session? We've talked about governments, and we have heard all our panelists refer to the necessity to remove barriers that keep industrial leaders away from the risk in what would be host countries, barriers that keep the World Bank at a distance. The answer is a dynamic approach, and I guess the best way to say it is that local governments have to put their act together and to look into their governance regulation. We know there is money out there. We know it is risk adverse, so the message to the governments is reduce the risk and we can make the change so that happens, so that in hopefully a short time we can report progress. Thank you very much to all. Thank you for your attention.